People have all kinds of strategies to create lists. Maybe you thought about it all day while you're at work. Maybe it came to you in a dream. Maybe you thought of it while you were pooping. Maybe you just watched Mad Max Fury Road and you need to make sure that the $1,000 you spent at Games Workshop is actually worth it. I bet all of you watching this have plenty of experience making lists. But try it my way. No, I'm serious. Like, it actually works. Or combine my style with your style to make some kind of super style that just flips the meta upside down. In this video, we're going to go over some tips and tricks to building a competitive list. I'm also going to show you a way to classify most units in 40k, as well as a checklist that you can go over to make sure you're covering every angle in your list, all while using your favorite unit. Nice! By the end of this video, your list will operate like a well-oiled machine of death, or at least a well-lubricated Slanesh power fist. Before we begin, my name is Sureblade. I've been into 40k for over 20 years and have played a metric crap ton of 9th edition. I'm a brand new content creator for 40k, so if you enjoy this video, a like goes a long way. Alright, so the first thing I do when I build a new competitive list is I decide on what's my favorite unit. This could be anything. This can be your favorite model, the model you're just testing for competitive play, your favorite conversion, or maybe it's just the model that makes you happy. This unit is the reason you're playing the list. Maybe it's 90 Devil Gaunts or 10 Blightlord Terminators, 3 Dreadnoughts. If this unit isn't competitive, we're going to do our best to make it competitive by turning it into an essential cog to the war machine. So next we need to decide on the theme of our list. So the theme is incredibly important because it will allow the list to tell you what it needs. So to determine your theme, you must first classify your favorite unit choice. So in a nutshell, is it an infantry unit, is it a vehicle unit, or is it a medium unit? So infantry units are models that have 1 to 2 wounds and are vulnerable to lots of damage 1 and damage 2 shots, but are resistant to things like multi-meltas and las cannons. So like your typical Space Marines, Demonettes, or Guardsmen. And then vehicle units are their opposite. So a vehicle unit needs to have 7 or more wounds, is vulnerable to multi-melta and other 3+ damage weapons, but it's resistant to 1 to 2 damage weapons that rely on multiple shots. So for example, Knights, Mortarians, Dreadnoughts, or Wraithlords. So then there's medium units, and medium units have between 3 and 6 wounds, and they're vulnerable to everything and vulnerable to nothing at the same time. Now it seems a little strange, but the most reliable defense to a las cannon or multi-melta, besides being 1 wound, is a 4-up invulnerable, because that means that 50% of the powerful attacks against you are going to fail. But the best defense against the anti-infantry weapons is most commonly a 1-up armor save, and in 9th edition there's pretty decent amount of units that have both of those, making them vulnerable to everything and nothing, which is really important to remember when you're making the list. So these 3 categories are the backbone of what's going to become the theme of your list, and I can't express the importance of sticking to your theme if you want to min-max your army. So for example, if I have an entire army made up of Blood Angel Death Company, and besides those characters, not a single unit has more than 2 wounds apiece in it, this means that I fear the Heavy Bolter, but I do not really fear the Multi-Melta. So now my army has a defined target for my battle plan, which is destroy every Heavy Bolter and anti-infantry unit my opponent has, and don't really worry about the anti-tank stuff unless it's in my way. Now, what if I were to add a Redemptor Dreadnought to this list? It's a very tanky unit, but will it make the list tankier?
Oh yeah! Oh yeah! Yeah!
In most situations, the answer is no. So even though the Redemptor Dreadnought is one of the tankiest units in the game, its defenses don't quite mean as much since your opponent is thinking, oh, thank you for taking that, now my multi-meltas have an obvious target, instead of having to shoot at 2 wound Marines. So, you know, good job making his multi-meltas more effective. I really hope it was worth it. Now, Now, the exact opposite can be said for this Dark Angel Dreadnought list. It laughs at the bolters and heavy bolters, but it fears for its life from the multi-meltas and other anti-tank weapons. Adding a single infantry unit to this list will make your opponent's army much more offensive against you, because giving him an infantry target increases the killing power of all the anti-infantry weapons and units that he spent the points on.
Yeah, good times. Good times. Ow! Still love this thing.
So if the list is pure Dreadnought, and your opponent were to take 500 points even of anti-infantry guns, then you're basically starting the game off 2,000 points versus 1,500 points. When you mix these two units, you're also giving yourself more things to worry about and more work for your army to do in order to survive. Now the third category is medium units, and these can be included with either setup as long as they meet the following conditions. So in a vehicle list, they need to have at least a 2+ save and 3 or more wounds, and in an infantry list, they need to have a 4+ invuln and between 3 and 7 wounds. The reason being is the 2+ save is really resistant to anti-infantry attacks, just like the rest of the vehicle army. That ain't nice. Or for the infantry army, it's very resistant to multi-meltas and other anti-tank because of the 4+ invuln. So this is just a good guideline to try to stick to when you're making your lists. You could still mix, just remember anytime you mix, you're increasing your opponent's offense against you. Cool. So now that we know what type of theme your favorite unit belongs in, we can now decide on what your favorite unit's battlefield role is. So the easiest way to classify battlefield roles is something that we're all pretty familiar with. Is it a tank? Is it a damage dealer? Or is it a support? So obviously a tank unit isn't an actual tank. It's just a unit designed to take more damage than it deals. So like Blade Guard veterans, Blade Lord Terminators, or most Custode units. Is it a damage dealing unit that's designed to hit super hard but avoid as much incoming damage as it can? Things like Eradicators or Retributors or an Exocrine. Maybe your favorite unit is a support unit. This is a unit that's designed to do something that the army needs, such as gathering objectives, deploying scramblers, buffing another unit. Most characters are classified as support units, but not all of them. So support units are usually the units that you take for objective purposes. So 5 intercessor units are support, since their role is to either hold the backline objective in your deployment zone or obsec the middle objective. They do this better than they tank damage or do damage. So then cheap deep striking units like flayed ones or lictors are also support units, because the real reason you're taking them in the list is to deploy scramblers or do some other kind of secondary objective. So now your favorite unit might do multiple roles at the same time, but he's going to be better at one of these 3 than the other 2. So now that you've figured out which one of those he can do, we can begin actually building the list. Now there is an advanced tactic for mixing vehicles and infantries in the same army, but that's a pretty in-depth explanation that I can definitely do for another videos if you guys would want, because pretty much every rule has an exception. Alright, now here's a checklist of things that you need to do if you are playing using the GT mission packs. You'll need 2 units whose dedicated role in your army is to hold the back objectives, the ones that start off in your deployment zone. Not every single mission has 2 objectives in your deployment zone, but most of them do. So next you're going to need 2 units that will 100% get to the mid objectives first turn, that are also expendable preferably. So these would be your support units. So keep in mind, if the objective is in the center, which most missions have the objective in the center, you're going to need to move at least 10 inches the first turn to get there. So if you have a 6-inch movement, an advance is not reliable enough to get there. So most of GT missions will have 2 objectives in the center field, but some of them, one of them even has 4. So next you're going to need some kind of melee units, preferably 2 of them, that will charge to the mid objective on the second turn and hold it. So these are usually a more tanky unit that are designed to take and hold the objective. Ideally, They will countercharge whatever your opponent has on the midfield objective when they get there, giving them a little bit more of an offensive boost than normal. Next, you're going to need teeth. So you're going to need anti-tank enough to deal with a Imperial Knight in one turn, or if you were to go up against like an Iron Hands Dreadnought army, you're not completely screwed, or a pure Orc buggy list, you're going to need a pretty reliable amount of anti-tank. And obviously the rest of your points are going to go into anti-infantry. So you want to make sure that you have enough to deal with an entire Marine army, or a Necron Silver Tide, or even an Orc Green Tide, just something that's just pure infantry. Make sure you can deal with it. As a bonus kind of optional category, I always recommend putting some source of mortal wound output in your army. Like mortal wounds, just they counter everything. It just goes through any defenses. So if you have it, take it. Sadly, not every single army has a good point efficient source of mortal wounds.
Cannon!
Now, when deciding on the units that you're going to have hold your back objectives in your deployment zone, it is really important to remember you need to keep a low profile. So things like Eradicators and Retributors are not backline objective holders. If you threaten your opponent's main units, there's a good chance you're going to lose that back objective to enemy fire just because you made the target on your head so large. So these cheaper units also are there to help screen out deep striking units, which normally you wouldn't want to waste powerful units on. So for the backline objective holders, troops usually fit this role the best. So things like intercessors, I mean, honestly, any army's standard troops do this job pretty well. But for vehicle armies, things like a land speeder, a cheap walker, or any other insignificant unit will usually do the trick. Just make sure that your opponent doesn't want to kill it very badly. You want them to make sure that it kind of feels like a waste of bullets to pull you off that objective, when his gun that he's shooting could go into something that's much more important for him to kill. Otherwise, if he does shoot it off, try to have some kind of a backup plan ready. So now the objectives in the middle of the battlefield follow a pretty similar role. So it's important to remember that a unit must move at least 10 inches to put a toe into the mid objective if they started at the very edge of the deployment zone and can run in a straight line. So each inch that you're off from a straight shot is another inch that you need to be able to move to. Also, this unit will most likely die, but it will be for the greater good. If I use some minimum point in cursors and say like a 90 point unit of regular bikes, I will be holding the 2 mid objectives when I end my turn. Now my opponent has to make a choice. Does he waste fire on them to deny me the points I'll be getting, or shoot the unit he actually wants to shoot? He also has to decide if he should charge that unit I put in an objective so that he can take it from me, which he can fail that charge. And if he fails that charge, it just gives me 5 points for free next turn. Which brings me to the next category. Countercharge. So these units are the reason why your objective grabbers in the midfield died. These are your slower units that can hold the line like a call center for an internet provider. These guys are going to charge whatever's on the objective. They're going to gut the enemy and make a campfire of their corpses right on the center of the objective. So units like Blade Guard, Terminators, or big OBSEC balls, things like that always fill this role very well. So some units like Deathwing Terminators can also be tanks and damage dealers at the same time, but mainly you're taking this unit to just sit and hold on that objective and not really leave. So obviously all these different roles we're having units do isn't cheap points wise, but on the bright side, when it comes down to deployment, you can see how we already know what a lot of our army is going to do and where it's going to be going without even having to look too much at our opponent's deployment. This is just going to make everything go a little bit smoother and a little bit easier because you know their role. Everybody knows what they're doing. They're there for a reason. But next we have to add the teeth to the army. So the teeth of the army are the damage dealers that have one main obvious job: to remove the most dangerous things your opponent has. So things like Eradicators tank commanders, that scary looking bald guy with the thunder hammer. These guys are the artillery and the cavalry. And it's important to include as much of this type of unit as you can while still meeting the previous criteria that I mentioned. If you feel like you're not getting too much dedicated damage dealers into your army, it usually means you have too much support in your list. So don't use a Blade Guard Ancient to buff 5 Blade Guard when you could ditch him and just run 2 squads of 4 Blade Guard, for example. So how do you know when you have enough damage dealing? So this is the benchmark that I kind of like to use, is I always ask myself, can this list kill 20 Necron warriors in one go? And this doesn't, when you've probably heard this saying before, this doesn't mean can I kill 20 Necron warriors by shooting them and then attacking? No, you need to kill it in one go, one dice roll. They didn't get any reanimation rolls. Otherwise, you're going to significantly hurt your damage output and get tar pitted, and that's not good. So next, can your list severely wound Mortarion, or even just kill him flat outright? Then are you better at dealing with Mortarion in the shooting phase, or are you better at dealing with Mortarion in the combat phase, or is it going to have to be a little bit of both? You're going to need to know this battle plan before you fight Mortarion. Don't think of how you're going to deal with Mortarion when you see Mortarion. Now you're always going to struggle against one more than the other. Will your list struggle more against a pure infantry list or a pure vehicle list? You're usually not going to get a 50-50 even at both. Like, you're going to be better against one than the other, and knowing which one you're worse against is going to be really important for understanding how you're going to tackle different matchups. If you're not happy with your damage dealer's ability to deal with one or the other, can you take away something, or can you change some war gear in order to add more teeth to the list? But always trying to add more teeth is usually better than more support. You got to know when the support weighs out more than the points you'd get for just having another body. So great rule of thumb, that's words that I live by. If overwhelming firepower does not solve your issue, you probably haven't applied enough. So those are the basic rules of almost every unit in 40k. But again, a reminder, you want to stick to that theme. So if you're using incursors to just take the midfield objective right away, and you feel like, oh, I need them because they do that, remember, like, an Invictor does the exact same thing, but it's a vehicle version. So using the right tool that your list needs is important. And if you really want to use this unit and it doesn't work with the unit you're using now, just make 2 armies, but try to keep them themed. This is the key to min-maxing your army, which is going to just make you overall more powerful. So now you got to figure out how your list is going to operate. So if I have a pure Dreadnought list again, and I'm fighting my opponent, I need to be focusing all my might on his most dangerous anti-tank units. And if I'm not sure I'm playing a new army, just ask your opponent. Just be like, hey, what units should my Dreadnoughts be really afraid of? And he'll usually point to them for you. Kill those. The whole time you'll be doing that, you're going to be fighting off OBSEC on the troops, because they're going to try to take those objectives from you. But the longer the game goes, like troops versus big Dreadnoughts, like, they'll win at the start, but they're not going to win that in the long run. So as my Dreadnoughts start to kill more and more of the anti-tank things my opponent has, my list just becomes more and more tanky with each kill. So, and then on a side note, I'm going to have to be very careful and use my Dreadnought's large base to block off a lot of the models from the objective. So luckily, most OBSEC units fight poorly against bigger units. So when you combine all these tips, making sure you're min-maxing your army, you're going to find yourself playing 40k with a pretty decent advantage right out the gate. So your friends might not enjoy all their heavy bolters wounding you on 5s, or their last cannons picking off units with 1 wound, but just link them this video so they can get good instead of calling you a whack player. I don't know about you, but I don't play Warhammer to watch my precious painted units die horrible deaths over the course of 3 to 4 hours. So So using these tactics, you should be able to build just about any type of list you want. 90% of the time, it's going to be very cool looking and striking on the battlefield. Usually they end up being pretty lore friendly and thematic. But just, I mean, take a look at, these are some of the min-maxed armies that I've created, and you kind of see the theme. I especially love this kind of creepy crawler Necron army. Like this one's fun. It's all canop tech, lots of big wounds, exact opposite of what people are prepared for when they think they're going to fight Necrons. Hell yeah, you made it to the end of the video. You know, if it helped you out in any way, if this helped you kind of tune up your list, or maybe you can do some more pruning on your list, adjust it slightly, and help you win your next battle with it, please hit that thumbs up icon. I'm a brand new 40K content creator, and it helps substantially.